My name is Ethan Park, and before I tell you what happened tonight, before I tell you about the chandeliers and the 500 people holding their breath and the sound of one wine glass shattering on a marble floor, I need you to understand what kind of person I am. I am the kind of person who spent his last month's rent on bandages, gauze pads and antiseptic and medical tape from the 24-hour pharmacy on the corner, purchased at 2 in the morning in a soaked convenience store uniform while my hands were still shaking. I counted the coins out on the counter. The pharmacist looked at me the way people look at you when they can see the edges of your situation. And I looked back at her and said thank you, and I meant it, and I walked out into the rain. I spent 3 days after that spoon-feeding a stranger. A dying stranger, a stranger whose name I didn't know, whose face I couldn't stop looking at, whose hand closed around my wrist at 2 in the morning and didn't let go. My own stomach was making sounds that had no business being audible, but I fed him first, every time. The soup was cheap. The silence between us was not. When it was over, when he was gone, taken by people who arrived before I came home from my shift, he left a card on my table, gold embossed, thick paper, a name I didn't recognize, a number, 4 words in handwriting that was controlled and somehow still urgent. When you're ready, A. And then I was evicted, and the rain came, and the card went into a puddle on the street and became, in under 30 seconds, an unreadable blur. The name gone, the number gone, 1 letter left, just the A, before the rain erased even that. That was 412 days ago. Tonight, I am standing in this ballroom in a suit that smells like a thrift store, holding a glass of sparkling water I'm afraid to drink because I'm not sure if I'm allowed to, being laughed at by men who have never once in their comfortable lives had to choose between eating and keeping someone else alive. The man laughing loudest is named Julian Vane. He just called me a country bumpkin. He said it like a gift, like he was giving the room something, and the room accepted it because rooms like this always accept what men like Julian offer. He's mid-sentence right now, building to something. The crowd is leaning in. And then, I feel it before I understand it. A shift in the air, a change of pressure like the moment before a storm. Every instinct I have tells me to look up. I look up, and he is standing there. The man with the storm-gray eyes, the man I kept alive on cheap soup and trembling hands in 3 days of silence that felt more honest than anything I've said out loud since. He is not looking for me anymore. He has found me. And he is walking toward me through 500 silent people, and the look on his face is, I don't have a word for it yet. I'll find one. I have time now. Because he's here. And he's lowering himself to one knee on a marble ballroom floor in front of everyone who just laughed at me. Let me tell you how we got here. It was a Tuesday in November, and the rain was the kind that has given up being polite about it. Not a drizzle, not a shower, a deliberate, sustained soaking, the kind of rain that finds the hole in your left shoe within 40 seconds and doesn't stop until it knows every inch of your sock. I was coming home from a double shift at the convenience store. My uniform smelled like ramen broth and somebody else's cigarette smoke. I had 700 won in my pocket and a headache that had been building since mid-morning. I was taking the alley on Gumho Street, the shortcut that saved me 7 minutes, because I had learned in 6 months of double shifts to be very serious about 7 minutes. I almost stepped on him. He was enormous. Even collapsed against the base of a dumpster with blood soaking through what had once been an extraordinarily expensive suit. Even like that, broken and barely conscious, he had a physical presence that made the alley feel smaller, like the walls had drawn in around him, like the space recognized that something significant was occupying it. The blood was real, dark and spreading and mixing with the rain into something that moved across the asphalt toward my feet. The smell of it was iron and something sharper, something final. I stood there for maybe 4 seconds, 4 seconds of my brain cycling through every rational option. Call an ambulance and walk away. Call the police and walk away. Just walk away. You are exhausted and you are broke and you do not know this person and the alley is dark. And nothing about this is your responsibility. 4 seconds. And then his eyes opened. Gray, storm gray, the exact color of the sky above us. Unfocused with pain and blood loss, sliding in and out, but landing on me, finding my face, like they'd been looking for it, like I was expected. He said, "Don't call anyone, please." His voice was barely a breath, but the please was real. Whoever this man was, whatever had put him bleeding in this alley, he had reasons. And in that moment, looking into those eyes, I made a decision that the rational part of my brain would spend the next 412 days trying to explain. I knelt down. I said, "Okay." I said, "Put your arm around my shoulders." And then I picked up a 6'2" man who outweighed me by 40 kilograms, and I carried him 4 blocks through the rain. I want to be honest about what that was like physically, because films always make it look effortless, and it was not effortless. It was 4 blocks of my knees threatening to quit, his weight leaning into me so that every step was a negotiation between momentum and collapse. My thin jacket soaked through immediately, and then his soaked weight on top of my soaked jacket, and the rain finding new and creative ways to be cold. I had to stop twice. Once at the corner of Kim Ho and Darim because my left leg was shaking badly enough that I was afraid I'd drop him. Once on my building's front step to get the key out of my pocket without losing my grip on him. He was conscious enough to move his feet, barely. Every few steps he made a sound, not a cry, something more controlled than that, air through clenched teeth, a sound of absolute deliberate endurance. Between those sounds, he was silent, and so was I. I got him through my door. I got him onto my futon, which was also my couch and also, frankly, the primary piece of furniture I owned, and he made one sound when he lay back, one long, slow exhale, like a man setting down something so heavy he had forgotten it wasn't his own body. And then he passed out. I stood there for a moment, dripping on my own floor, looking at an unconscious stranger bleeding on my futon, and I thought, well. And then I went to get supplies. The first night was the worst. I cleaned the wound with antiseptic, which I want to say went smoothly, but actually involved me reading the instructions on the bottle 4 times because my hands were shaking and I didn't trust myself. I bandaged him. I covered him with the blanket from my own futon and sat on the floor beside him and watched him breathe. The fever came by midnight, 39 degrees. By 2 in the morning, it was 40, and I was doing the cold cloth on the forehead routine I learned from taking care of my mother years ago, pressing it gently to his skin, watching his face tighten and then release in the rhythm of pain managed but not gone. I didn't sleep. I set alarms for every 2 hours and sat in the chair I moved next to the futon and listened to him breathe and thought about things I had no business thinking, like the way his lashes cast shadows on his cheekbones, like the scar at the corner of his mouth that I found myself wanting to know the story of, like the impossible contradiction of his face. Someone who looked that powerful, that composed, even unconscious, shouldn't look like that when he was just sleeping. Shouldn't look that. I stopped that thought approximately 40 times over the course of the night. I lost count after that. By morning, the fever had peaked and begun to come down. Not gone, but retreating. I made soup on my 2-burner stove, the kind you make when you have very little money and a great deal of anxiety, and I sat on the floor beside him and I waited for him to wake up. When he woke up, he was confused, not frightened, I noticed that. Someone trained not to surface into fear, even from a dead sleep. His eyes opened and moved around the room and landed on me, and the confusion lasted about 3 seconds, and then he was just looking at me. I held the bowl. I spooned the soup. I blew on each spoonful the way you do when someone can't afford to burn their mouth on top of everything else, leaning in close enough that I could feel the heat of both the soup and him, our faces closer together in that small apartment than they had any practical reason to be. He said, "You smell like soap." I said, "It's cheap soap. Please, stop talking." He said, "Okay." But he was smiling when he said it. Not a full smile, just a ghost of one at the corner of the mouth with a scar. And something in my chest did something it absolutely had no permission to do, and I looked back at the bowl very quickly and focused on not spilling anything. He called me Angel once in those first feverish hours, just once, half asleep, drifting back under after a coughing fit, his eyes unfocused and warm with fever. He looked at me and said, "Angel," in a voice so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. I didn't imagine it. I've thought about it approximately every day since. By the second day, the fever had dropped enough that he was properly conscious, present, aware of the room and of me in a way that was more difficult to manage than the fever version of him, if I'm being honest. Changing the bandage was a process I approached with a level of clinical focus that I want to say was entirely professional and had nothing to do with the fact that I was about to spend 20 minutes with my hands on him. It had a little to do with that. I unwrapped the dressing, I cleaned the wound, which was healing, slowly but healing. I rebandaged with the careful concentration of someone taking an exam they cannot afford to fail. My fingers against his shoulder, his collarbone where I needed to secure the tape, the curve of his upper arm, and every point of contact, every single one, came with this sensation, a warmth that moved up through my fingertips and into my palm and spread from there in a way that had no clinical explanation. I told myself, static electricity, dry air, synthetic fiber. I told myself very many rational things. He watched me the entire time. I could feel his gaze on my face the way you feel sunlight, directional, intentional. His eyes tracking my expression while I kept mine on my hands. He pointed out that my hands were shaking. I told him they weren't. He didn't argue. He just kept looking at me with that expression I was becoming increasingly unable to identify. And I finished the bandage and sat back, and we were both quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been awake?" I said, "That's not relevant." He said, "You have been awake for at least 36 hours. I can tell. When did you last eat?" And I said nothing, because the answer was, this morning I ate half the soup that was meant for him because he'd fallen back asleep before he could finish it, and before that it was the rice crackers from my chef the previous night, and before that it was whatever I could find in a bag that was not primarily for him. He knew. I don't know how. Something in the way I didn't answer. His jaw tightened just slightly. He said, "There's a card in my jacket, inner left pocket. Call the number on it and tell them to bring food. Tell them it's for me. They'll come." I found the jacket. I found the pocket. But the card had blood on it, and I couldn't read the number properly. And I thought, later. I'll figure it out later. I went to the corner store instead and bought more rice and more cheap ingredients, and I made more soup. And I came back, and I fed him again. He looked at me for a long time after that, like he was calculating something, like I was a problem he was trying to solve. I pretended not to notice. I was getting quite practiced at that. By the third day, his fever was gone, but he still couldn't stand properly. His shoulder wouldn't take weight. His body was doing what bodies do after significant blood loss and 2 days of fever, conserving, rebuilding, asking politely to be left alone. He couldn't bathe. I could either leave him to manage with what he could reach, or I could help. I helped. I want to be very clear about what this was. Warm water, a cloth, a person doing a necessary and compassionate thing for someone who needed it. I was careful, methodical. I kept my eyes where they needed to be, and my hands where they were supposed to be, and my expression neutral. None of this prevented the experience from being, in its quiet way, one of the most electrically charged 20 minutes of my life. It was the silence mostly. The room was very quiet. I had lit a small candle because the electricity was being unreliable that week, and the candlelight turned everything amber and soft, and the only sounds were the drip of the cloth into the basin and his breathing, which had slowed in a way I recognized as not pain, not discomfort, but something else. Awareness. I felt him watching me the way I'd felt the soup steam, warm and close. I worked my way up, his hands first, careful around the injury, his neck, where the tension had been living for 3 days, and then his forehead, where I pressed the warm cloth and smoothed back his hair, damp at the temples and slightly curling in a way that made him look like a different version of himself, younger, softer, less armored. When the cloth touched his forehead, he exhaled. Not a sigh,
Not a breath of pain or relief. The exhale of someone laying down a weight they have been carrying so long it stopped feeling separate from themselves. And I thought, my hand still on his face with a cloth between us, who is this man? Who is he when he's not bleeding or feverish or unconscious? What does he look like when he's standing up straight in whatever world he belongs to? Because this world, my world, this one-room apartment with the leaky faucet and the cheap candles and the two-burner stove, I watched him in it for 3 days, and he was never awkward, never condescending, never uncomfortable. He just settled, like he'd been looking for a place to settle, and this, inexplicably, was it. He asked me very quietly where I had come from. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. I just kept going. My hands, the cloth, the candlelight, and the question hung in the air between us and became something neither of us needed to answer because it wasn't really a question about geography.
He woke up at 2 in the morning and I was asleep in the chair. I don't know how long he had been awake before he touched me, but when I startled out of sleep, his hand was around my wrist. Not gripping, not urgent, just there. His fingers around my wrist, loosely, the way you hold something you're afraid of losing in the dark, loose enough that I could have moved, firm enough that he would have felt it. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. The room was dark and blue-gray from the streetlight through the window, and the rain was soft on the glass, and somewhere outside, a cat knocked something over and went quiet. In my little apartment, in the middle of the night, we were not whatever we were supposed to be. We were just two people, sitting close in the dark. One of us was awake and watching the other with an expression I only caught for a second before I closed my eyes again. Like, found. Like, finally. I fell back asleep with his hand around my wrist. I slept better than I had in months. When I woke up in the morning to my alarm, his hand was still there. He was still looking at me. I said, I have to go to work. He said, I know. I said, there's food on the counter. Don't move around too much. He said, okay. And then just before I closed the door, he said my name. Just my name, Ethan, the way you say a word when you're memorizing it. I left. I worked a 24-hour shift, and I came home, and he was gone. The futon was made, the bowl was washed, the window was cracked open an inch to let out the smell of antiseptic. Everything was exactly as it should have been if no one had been here, except that it was more carefully arranged than I'd ever managed, and the faint trace of his cologne still sat in the air. That dark, expensive scent that had no right to survive 3 days in a one-room apartment, and yet had. On my table, there was a card, gold embossed, cream paper, a name, Alexander Voss, and a number, and beneath it, in handwriting that was precise and yet somehow still urgent, 4 words. When you're ready. A. I stood there for a very long time holding that card. When you're ready. Ready for what? Ready to call? Ready to what? Say thank you? Ask who he was? Ask why men with guns had been in that alley? Ask why he had looked at me like that every single time? Like I was something he had been trying to locate for a long time and had finally found? I pressed the card flat between my palms, like something that might dissolve if I wasn't careful enough. I carried it for 3 days before the eviction notice that had been sitting under my door became impossible to defer. I want to tell you, the eviction wasn't a surprise. I'd known it was coming for 2 months. The notice had been under my door for 9 days. I'd been doing the math every night, and every night the math came up the same. Not enough. Not close. The landlord helped me carry my boxes out. He was apologetic in the way that people are when they've already made the decision and the apology is just a formality, a social convention that costs them nothing and means nothing, but would feel rude to skip. I had 3 boxes. They were cardboard, which is to say, not waterproof. They began to absorb the rain immediately. I had my work uniform in a plastic bag. I had my mother's photograph pressed inside my jacket against my chest. And I had the card in my left coat pocket, which I touched 3 times while carrying the boxes to make sure it was still there. It was still there. Until it wasn't. I don't know exactly how it happened. A gust of wind, maybe. When I was putting down one of the boxes, my pocket wasn't sealed. The card was thinner than paper had any right to be, and the wind didn't care. I saw it go. A flash of cream against wet gray pavement. I dropped the box, both boxes, and I ran. I actually ran down the street after a piece of paper in the middle of the rain, pushing past a man walking his dog and a woman with an umbrella who looked at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. The card skittered, tumbled, caught air, hit the curb, landed in a puddle. 30 seconds. I reached into the puddle and pulled out a piece of cream-colored paper that was no longer cream-colored and no longer anything. The gold embossing was gone. The name was gone. The number was gone. Every digit washed into the water like it had never existed. The A was still there, barely. One letter, just a curve of one initial in handwriting I had memorized. And then the rain took that too. I knelt on the wet asphalt in front of the puddle for a while. I don't know how long. Long enough that the boxes I'd left behind were thoroughly destroyed, and the rain had soaked all the way through to my mother's photograph, and I was too numb to feel the cold anymore. I had spent my last month's rent on his bandages. I had spent 3 days feeding him. I had fallen asleep in the chair beside him every night because I was afraid that if I left the room, something would happen and I wouldn't be there. And now I had a piece of wet paper, and no address, and no name I could search, and no way to find a man who existed as far as the world was concerned, only in the 48 hours I had spent in a small apartment in the rain. I picked up what was left of my boxes. I found a shelter that had a bed. I started looking for work. I didn't look back. A year later, I deliver water. 20-liter jugs, blue plastic, the kind designed to sit on top of office dispensers. I picked them up from the distributor at 6 in the morning and I deliver them on a route that covers 4 residential towers in this part of the city. The towers have elevators. The elevators require key cards. The key cards are for residents. I am not a resident. 20 liters is heavier than it sounds. That's the thing nobody tells you. Water sounds light. Water sounds like something that flows and moves and yields. And then you put 20 liters of it in a plastic container and lift it by a handle and learn immediately and completely what weight is. I carry 2 at a time on my best days. My route includes an 11-floor building. Floor 3. My breathing has adjusted, found its rhythm. The handles are already cutting into my palms. I've developed calluses there, thick ones, ridged, the kind that show up in the creases of my hands and the pads of my fingers. I've stopped being surprised by them. I've stopped being much of anything about them. Floor 6. The heating cuts out in the stairwell at floor 6, always, without explanation, and the cold comes in like it's been waiting outside the door. My jacket is thin. I bought it secondhand, the same place I bought the rest of what I wear, a charity shop on the edge of the market district that has good things if you come on the right day and bad things if you don't, and I've learned to adjust my expectations to whatever day it is. My fingers go numb on the handles, numb fingers on wet plastic. The handles sweat in the cold, requires a level of sustained concentration that crowds out most other thoughts, which is, depending on the day, either the best or worst thing about this job. Floor 9. My knees are doing something they shouldn't be doing. A sound, not quite a pop, more of a deep creak, the sound of a body asking a quiet question about workload and rest ratios and whether anyone is listening. Nobody is listening. Floor 10. I stop on the landing and press my back against the concrete wall and breathe for 30 seconds. Through the narrow stairwell window, I can see the street below. A black car idles at the curb, the kind of car with a driver, with heated seats, with a sound system that costs more than my 6 months of rent combined. The kind of car that belongs to someone who has never had to learn what floor 10 of a stairwell feels like. For 1 second, one unguarded, dangerous second, I am somewhere else. I am in a room with lamplight and the smell of antiseptic and a warm cloth in my hand. I am listening to someone breathe. I am feeling a hand around my wrist in the middle of the night, and the specific quality of that, the weight of being held. I come back. I always come back. Floor 11. A knock. A woman in a silk robe opens the door, takes the jug without looking at me, and closes it again. I'm not thanked. I go back down. I do this 7 more times before noon. The second job. Apex is the kind of gym that costs more per year to join than I have earned in my entire life. I know this because the membership rates are posted in gold lettering near the entrance, and I have walked past those gold letters approximately 200 times now on my way to the supply closet to get my bucket and my brush. I clean the grout between the floor tiles. This requires being on my hands and knees, which puts me at the exact level of the shoes of the members, which means I have an exceptionally detailed knowledge of the footwear choices of people with disposable income. I'm very good at being invisible. I have been practicing it for a year, and I have become, I think, genuinely skilled. I can be in a room with 20 people and have none of them see me. I can remove myself from the peripheral vision of an entire social circle. I am the human equivalent of furniture, noticed enough to navigate around, insufficient to actually see. There were 2 men in the stretching area while I worked the third floor tiles last week, my age, maybe a year older. They were talking about their company, a startup that had just raised something called a Series B, which I gathered was a large amount of money based on the casual way they referred to millions, as though millions were a unit of measurement, like minutes or meters. They talked about the difficulty of finding good staff. I was on my hands and knees 4 meters away, scrubbing grout. The taller one gestured while making a point, a broad, expansive gesture, the gesture of someone who has never had to worry about what his arms might hit. And his foot caught the handle of my bucket. He didn't fall, he didn't stumble, he just displaced it. 20 minutes of work, spreading across 30 square feet of clean, pale hardwood. He looked down at me. He frowned. He said, "I really shouldn't leave my equipment in the middle of the floor." I was against the wall. My bucket was against the wall. His foot had traveled a significant distance in an expansive direction. I said, "I'm sorry, sir, I'll take care of it." Because I said it. Because the job requires it. Because one of the things you learn when you spend enough time being invisible is that apologizing for being stepped on is faster than explaining that you weren't in the wrong. And faster means I can go home 20 minutes earlier, and 20 minutes earlier means I have enough left over at the end of the month for something small, something tiny, to send to my mother. I cleaned up the water. I moved to a different section of the floor. I cataloged the feeling carefully. That specific, cold, precise anger that comes not from the incident, but from the apology. From the knowledge that the apology was necessary, that I made the correct choice, and that the correct choice was, in this specific moment, the one that cost me something. I filed things like that away. Not for revenge. I'm too tired for revenge. Just for keeping. Just for making sure I remember who I am underneath all the invisible. The third job. The suit. I need to tell you about the suit, because the suit it's important. It is cheap polyester in a shade of black that is not quite black, but has not committed to any other color either. It fits in the way that a suit can fit when the person wearing it is not the person it was originally made for, close enough to fool someone who isn't paying attention, obvious to anyone who is. The jacket pulls at the shoulders, the trousers are slightly too long, and I've folded the cuffs, which creates an effect that manages to look simultaneously sloppy and effortful. It smells like someone else's occasion, like cedar and old air freshener, and the particular trapped smell of something that has spent a long time in a plastic bag. Julian Vane's assistant hired me through an agency. I was told to dress formally, be presentable, and not to speak unless spoken to, which I noted with a kind of dark humor as the single easiest instruction I had received in recent memory. Julian Vane. I'll try to be fair about this. He is the kind of man who has built an entire social architecture around the fact that he has never been refused. He shakes your hand while looking over your shoulder at the person he actually wants to speak to. He uses the word associate like a leash, something to hold you by without quite calling you what you are. He made me wait outside the car for 14 minutes, in the rain. I could see him through the window, finishing a drink, checking his phone, entirely comfortable. The window was right there. He could have lowered it. He could have said, "Come in." He chose not to.
And the choice was so small and so deliberate and so completely without malice. That's the worst part. There was no malice in it, just indifference. That I stood on the curb and let the rain soak through the polyester. And I thought about nothing for 14 minutes. Or rather, I tried to think about nothing and failed, and ended up thinking about a man with gray eyes and a gold-embossed card and a voice that said my name like it was something worth memorizing. He said I was wet. I said yes. He said, try not to get the seat wet. The leather was imported. I looked out the window at the rain. Somewhere between the car and the entrance, I had a thought I don't usually let myself have because it's not useful and it's not productive and it doesn't help anyone or anything.
If I disappeared tonight, right now, this minute, from the back of this car, the only thing Julian Vane would notice is that his left armrest didn't arrive at the gala. The only thing my route supervisor would notice is the unfinished delivery circuit. The only thing that Jim would notice is the grout that needs to be redone. I have been fading. Somewhere in this year of 3 jobs and insufficient sleep and cheap soup and cracked hands, I have faded into the background of the world. I am ambient. I am a silhouette. I am the thing people see around rather than at. I used to not be that. I used to be the person who ran 4 blocks through the rain carrying someone twice his weight because I couldn't leave a bleeding man in an alley. I still am that person. I just need to remember it more often. The car stops. Gold light spills onto wet pavement. Julian gets out without waiting. I straighten my wet jacket. I follow him into the light. I've been here for 2 hours. In 2 hours, I've been introduced to 4 people, eaten 1 small piece of food from a tray, and been positioned beside Julian like a prop he's rented for the evening. The food was extraordinary, 1 small bite of something I couldn't name and couldn't afford, and I thought about it for 20 minutes afterwards, which tells you everything about the previous 48 hours of meals. The room it's beautiful, honestly. I can give it that. The chandeliers are the real kind, the heavy, old kind, the kind that look like someone's grandmother's jewelry scaled to the size of an aircraft hangar. The flowers are fresh, the tablecloths are linen. The wine in everyone's glasses is the color of garnet, and I'm told it costs more per bottle than I make in a week. I am wearing the polyester suit. I have met its gaze in the bathroom mirror and made my peace with it. Julian has found his audience, 4 men, well-dressed, performing the specific ease of people who have never had to perform ease because they were born into it. They are laughing at something Julian said, and Julian is building towards something more. I can feel it. The way you feel weather changing, the pressure dropping, the quality of the air going tight. He puts his hand briefly on my arm, which is how he's been indicating to people all evening that I belong to him in some useful capacity. And he says, "This is my associate, Ethan." And then he pauses, and the pause is deliberate. And he says, "He's from the countryside, a project of sorts." The group laughs. One of them asks, "Which province?" Julian says, he probably doesn't know the name of it. Country bumpkin through and through. Look at that suit. I told him to dress appropriately. I look at the floor. Not from shame. I want to be clear about that. It is not shame. I abandoned shame somewhere between floor 9 and floor 10 of that stairwell. I look at the floor, because looking up would require me to see their faces, and seeing their faces would require me to feel things I cannot afford to feel in a room with 500 witnesses. Julian is still talking, building further. The audience is with him, leaning in, ready to accept whatever he offers. And then, I know those footsteps. I don't know how I know them. I heard them exactly once in a rain-soaked alley, barely conscious under my arm as I dragged us both home. But I know them. My body knows them before my brain finishes the sentence. I look out. He is in black, a suit so precisely tailored it looks like someone studied him, really studied him before making it. His posture is different from what I remember, and exactly the same as what I remember. That absolute stillness, that economy of movement, the quality of a man who has never once in his life needed to take up more space than he already occupies. He is. He looks exactly like he did. He looks like the fever dream version of him, except standing up, except healthy, except in possession of all the power his body had been trying to get back while it lay on my futon. He looks like what he was becoming when I left him to go to work, if I had been able to stay and watch. He has a scar. Left shoulder, under the jacket. I know that scar. I put the bandage there. His head turns, and then his eyes find me, and the room disappears. I need to tell you what it is like to be found by someone who has been looking for you. Not the polite looking of social convenience, not someone who glances around a party for a familiar face. The real kind, the 412-day kind. It's like being the only thing in focus in a photograph where everything else has gone soft. He looks at me, and the 500 people between us become irrelevant. Julian becomes irrelevant. The chandeliers, the wine, the expensive tablecloths, all of it just drops out. And it's just those eyes, storm gray, knowing. His expression is, I'm going to call it relief, but not the small kind, the kind that comes after a long search, the kind that is also grief for the searching, and fury at what he found, and gratitude that it ended, and something else underneath all of that, something I don't have a name for yet, something I've been trying not to name for 412 days. He begins to cross the room. The crowd parts, not because anyone asked them to, because they feel the direction he's moving and get out of it the way you get out of the way of something with gravity. Julian stops talking. His mouth is still open. The word he was building is just gone. His face has done something complicated and arrived ultimately at pale. And on the other side of the room, I catch sight of a man I recognize from somewhere I didn't expect to recognize anyone. An older man, patrician, silver-haired, the kind of man who has photographs taken with politicians. He has gone the specific shade of pale that belongs to someone who has just realized that the thing they thought they'd eliminated is standing upright in the room. I don't know who he is yet. I will learn, but I notice the recognition and I file it. Alexander stops in front of me. He is close enough that I can smell his cologne, dark and expensive and complicated, the same scent I memorized in my apartment because it had no right to survive what happened there, and yet it had. And close enough that I can see the specific quality of the gray in his eyes, which is not one gray, but many. Storm gray and winter gray, and the gray of that alley in November when the rain was coming down, and I found him. And then he says, in a voice that fills the room without raising itself, I have spent 412 days looking for the eyes that saved my life in that dark alley. I didn't think I'd find them being looked down upon by people who weren't fit to breathe your air. 500 people, not breathing. Me, not breathing. And then, very quietly, just to me, without the room in it at all, hi. Hi. That's what he says. After 412 days, after a lost card in a puddle, and 3 jobs, and 11 flights of stairs, and the absolute worst year of my life, he says, hi. And my voice, when I find it, says, hi, back. And something in my chest, which has been very tightly held for a very long time, releases, just slightly, just enough. He kneels. Alexander Voss, CEO of Voss Industries, the man this room has been assembled tonight to celebrate, the most powerful person in this building, kneels in front of me on the ballroom floor. He takes my hand, my right hand, the one with the calluses from the jug handles and the small chemical burn on the thumb and the cracked skin from the cold. He takes it in both of his, and he holds it for a moment, looking at it, and then he presses his lips to my knuckles. And I forget how to breathe. His mouth is warm, his hands are large and steady and certain. His eyes, looking up at me from his knees, are the same eyes I watched through 3 days of lamplight and fever, the same eyes that found my face in a rain-soaked alley and decided, immediately and completely, that I was expected. I should say something dignified, something that reflects the composure I've been telling myself I still possess. I say, "You're going to ruin your suit." And his mouth curves, that ghost of a smile, the same one I saw in those 3 days, the one that appeared so rarely and so briefly that each time it felt like something that had been earned rather than given. The ghost of it is there, on his face, just for a second, just for me. He says, "I'll buy another one." He stands up, and the man who was warm and quiet with me becomes something else, something I have not seen before but have no difficulty understanding. Cold, controlled, sharp as an instrument built for a specific purpose. He turns to Julian Vane. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. He says Julian's name and then lists, in order, every business relationship Julian Voss Industries touches, every club, every partnership, every social contract that exists in this room between Julian and anyone who matters. He says, "Consider them dissolved." He says, "My office will send the paperwork." And then he takes out his phone. He makes one call, 37 seconds. I count. Julian Vane, who 20 minutes ago held this room's attention like a man born to hold rooms, has become something remarkable, irrelevant. I can see it happening. The people around him take a small step back. Not dramatic, not theatrical. The organic, animal step of people removing themselves from the vicinity of a man who has stopped mattering. Julian opens his mouth. No words come. Alexander has already looked away. He crosses the room toward the silver-haired man I noticed earlier, the man who went pale when he saw that I was alive and standing. And I understand now, watching Alexander move toward him, what this man is. Not just an attendee at a gala, something older and more specific than that. Alexander says his name, Silas. He says it quietly enough that I can't hear it fully from where I'm standing, but I can read it. He says, "I have the recording, all of it." He says, "I have had it for 412 days, which gave me quite a lot of time to make copies." The police officers were already there, already inside. Alexander had arranged this before he walked in. He walked into this ballroom knowing every piece of what would happen, having spent 412 days building toward this specific moment. Uncle Silas, I learned his name an hour later, is walked out of the Harrington Foundation Gala through the main entrance, through every camera, past everyone who watched him arrive. This is what a status death looks like, witnessed by all, contested by none. I watch this from the center of the room. My hands are still warm where he held them. The calluses on my knuckles still carry the heat of his mouth. I think 412 days. He spent 412 days building toward tonight. Not just the rescue, not just the reunion. All of it, arranged, organized, patient, every piece in place. And then he walked in, and the first thing he did was kneel in front of me. He comes back to me. The controlled, cold version of him that just dismantled 2 people's lives in under 10 minutes does not come back. What comes back is him. The version I know. The version that lived in my apartment for 3 days and called me angel in a fever and wouldn't let go of my wrist in the dark. He is at my side immediately, his hand reaching for mine again, instinctive before he seems to consciously decide to do it, finds my hand and holds it. He says, "You're cold." I say, "I'm fine." He says, "You've been saying that for too long." And then his jacket, black, perfectly tailored, worth more than several months of anything I've earned recently, is around my shoulders. It's warm from his body. It smells like him. I should give it back. I should say, "I don't need this. I have managed without your jacket for 412 days. I don't give it back. I say, "You were counting the days?" He says, "Every one." And then something breaks open in me. Not in a dramatic way, not the way things break in films. Just a crack, just enough to let something through. I tell him about the card, about the rain and the puddle and the 30 seconds it took for everything to dissolve. I tell him I ran after it, actually ran, past strangers, down a street, after a piece of paper in a storm, because it was my only bridge to him, and I knew it, and then I didn't have it anymore. He is very still while I tell him this.
his hand around mine, not squeezing, just present. And when he finishes, he says, "I know, that's not your fault. None of this is your fault." And I say, "I don't know how to do this. I've spent a year being nobody, and I don't know how to be something again just because." He says, "You were never nobody. You were the person I was looking for. Those are not the same thing." And I think, he's right. I know he's right. I just need a little time to believe it again.
He says, "I lost you once because I let go of your hand. I will never make that mistake again." I don't let go of his hand. His assistant, efficient professional, someone who has clearly been doing this for him for a very long time and has learned exactly when to approach, materializes and says something quietly. He nods. He looks at me. He says, "Your debts, all of them, as of 40 minutes ago." I go very still. He says, "Your mother has been transferred, private ambulance, tonight. There's a neurological suite at Tsinghua Medical, the best in the country. The team assigned to her case is..." And then he lists names, credentials, equipment, specific, accurate, detailed, the way someone lists things when they have spent a significant amount of time researching them. He researched my mother's doctors. He found out what she needed, and he arranged the best version of it. While I was delivering water and scrubbing floors and standing in the rain outside someone else's car, he was... I cry. Not dramatically. Not the film version of crying. The breath leaves me and my eyes fill. And I'm wearing his jacket and holding his hand, and my mother is in good hands finally. After all of this, she is in good hands. And the year of 3 jobs and 11 stairs and cheap polyester and invisible and nobody and not enough and not enough and not enough. Not enough becomes enough, becomes more than enough, becomes over. He doesn't say, "Don't cry." He doesn't say, "This is a public place." He holds my hand, and he is there, and he lets me. I don't know how long. Long enough. He is afraid of losing me again. This is not a diagnosis I'm making unkindly. It's simply the only rational explanation for the past 48 hours. He has not let go of my hand for longer than physically necessary since the ballroom. He asked, with an expression I have decided to find endearing, whether I would prefer the guest suite of his penthouse or a separate apartment, immediately clarifying that the apartment would need to be in the same building, the same floor ideally, within line of sight of his office window if possible. I stayed in the guest suite. I'm not entirely sure when the guest suite stopped being the guest suite, somewhere around hour 30. I stopped thinking of it as a temporary arrangement and started thinking of it as the room where I wake up to his terrible anxiety about where I am. He has me in a glass-bottomed helicopter. I want that on record. I am in a helicopter with a glass floor, and the city is below us, very far below us, and I am pressing my forehead against the glass because the view is extraordinary, and I refuse to let the height make me miss it. He says, "Look down." I look down. Red and white roses, 100,000 of them. I will later learn the exact number is 112,000, rounded, and he rounded up, not down, covering the sprawling lawn of his private estate in a pattern that from up here, from this glass floor, resolves into words. "Will you stay with me forever?" I stare at this for a long time. He says, "The roses represent every minute I spent looking for you. I had them calculated. 412 days is approximately 593,000 minutes. I couldn't fit 593,000 roses on the lawn, so..." I say, "So you rounded to 100,000. He says, "I rounded up, actually, 112,000. I say, "You rounded up to 112,000 roses. He says, "Yes." I look at the roses below us, then at him, then back at the roses. I say, "You are the most unreasonable person I've ever met." He says, "I've been told." And the ghost of the smile is there again. The one I spent 3 days cataloging, the one that appears so rarely it feels like something earned. It's there, in the light of the helicopter cabin, softer than I've seen it before. Softer because we're alone, and because he doesn't have to perform anything, and because whatever he's feeling right now doesn't need to be contained. I look at 112,000 reasons arranged on the lawn below me, and I think this is the most excessive, beautiful, completely impractical thing anyone has ever done in my name. I think I had 3 days of soup and bandages and a 2 a.m. wrist hold, and it was enough to get us here. I think, imagine what we get with more time. He takes my hands, both of them, turned palm up, and he looks at them the way I looked at his wounds in those 3 days, carefully, like he's reading something. The calluses from the jug handles, the chemical burns from the cleaning fluid, the small scar on my thumb, the cracked skin of someone who could not afford a good hand lotion. Evidence of the year, all of it, laid out in the lines of my palms. He traces them, one at a time, his thumb moving slowly, gently, like he's memorizing. He says, "These hands kept me alive. Every callus, every mark, this is what I put you through by leaving, what this year put you through while I was searching." I say, "You didn't put me through it, circumstance did." He says, "The rain and I will have words." And I almost laugh. I don't quite, but something loosens in my chest, in the way that things loosen when they've been held very tightly for a very long time. Not all at once, but perceptibly. He takes out a small box. The ring inside is not the ostentatious kind, which tells me either he knew better or someone advised him. It's a thin, dark band, a single stone the color of a storm at the right angle. Simple. Right. He says, "I'm not asking you to forget what this year cost you. I'm not asking you to be grateful. I'm asking, and I know I am asking from a position of extraordinary unfairness, given that I left before you came home. I'm asking if you will let me spend whatever time you give me, making it impossible for you to ever again think that the only thing people would notice if you disappeared is the work you left behind." I stopped breathing. He heard that thought, the thought I'd never said out loud, never said to anyone, that lived only in the back of a car in the rain outside a gala I didn't belong in. He looked at me in that ballroom, and he saw it in me, the whole year of it, and he named it. I say, "How did you know I'd thought that?" He says, "Because I know what it looks like to be seen through rather than at, and because you are the person who looked at me in an alley when I was bleeding and powerless and had nothing to offer you, and chose to stay. Someone who does that deserves to be seen, completely, for the rest of their life." He slides the ring onto my finger. He holds my hand for a moment, steady, warm, completely certain. And then he presses his lips to my knuckles, to the calluses, to the cracked skin, to the scar on my thumb, to every single mark the year left on me. He kisses every one. I need to be honest about this part. It would be easy to say, I said yes immediately and everything dissolved into light. That's the version of the story that's easier to tell. The version where the gesture is sufficient, where 112,000 roses and a ring and a kneeling in front of 500 people add up cleanly to an answer. But I am a real person, and I spent a real year being invisible, and it doesn't dissolve in 48 hours, not even with all of this. I look at the ring on my hand, and I feel his warmth, and also the cold of the stairwell at floor 7, the sound of my bucket tipping over in the gym, the 14 minutes outside a car in the rain, the card in the puddle, the A, the single letter before the rain took even that. A year is a long time to be nobody. You don't unlearn it at altitude over 100,000 roses. I say, "I need you to understand something." He waits, completely attentive. He has, I realize, always been completely attentive to me, in the alley, in the apartment, in the ballroom, here. I'm not sure he knows how to be anything else in my direction. I say, "I'm not the person you remember from those 3 days. That person was younger. He didn't know yet how long a person could be stepped on before he started to believe he deserved it. I almost lost that. I almost forgot that the man who evicted me into the rain was not the authority on what I'm worth. I say, I'm still figuring out how to be seen. I'm still adjusting to this, to you. To the fact that you spent 412 days and a helicopter and 112,000 roses. He says, take whatever time you need. I'll wait. I've been waiting. I'm quite practiced at it by now. I look at the ring. I look at him. I say, 412 days? He says,
413 as of tonight. And something in me, something that has been clenched for a long time, opens. Not all the way, not yet, but enough. I say, I'm not saying no. He says, okay. I'm saying not yet. I'm saying, give me time to remember how to be real again. Give me time to let my eyes adjust to the light, and don't let go of my hand while I'm figuring it out. He says, I can do that. Just that. No argument. No performance of patience that is actually impatience dressed up. Just, I can do that. Simply. Like a man who has already decided that whatever I need, he will find a way to give it. I keep the ring on my finger. He keeps holding my hand. We stay until the estate goes dark below us, and the roses disappear into the night, and the city lights come fully on, and the sky above clears enough that I can see actual stars, which I haven't properly seen in a year of sleeping in rooms with too much ambient light. He stands close, his hand in mine, his jacket still on my shoulders. He doesn't push, he doesn't ask again. He watches the sky with me, and he breathes, and I breathe, and the city hums below us, indifferent and alive.
I think about my mother in a hospital room with good doctors and warm light. I think about the water jugs I won't be carrying tomorrow. I think about the gym floor and the car in the rain and the polyester suit and the thrift store smell and everything the year weighed. And then I think about a card on a table in a one-room apartment. 4 words, 1 initial, a handwriting I memorized without meaning to. When you're ready. I think I'm almost ready. Not quite, but almost. The distance between almost and yes is closing every time he holds on. I say, quietly into the night, 112,000 roses. He says, 112,000 minutes. I say, you're unreasonable, and I love you. He says, extremely, and I love you so much. And I don't laugh. I don't quite. But the thing in my chest that has been too tight for a year loosens another increment, another small release, and I think this is what it is. Not the grand gesture, not the kneeling or the helicopter or the flowers. This, a man standing close in the dark, not asking for more than I have, holding on. I think about the alley, the 4 seconds I stood there before I knelt down, 4 seconds between the rational choice and the one I actually made, and I think every good thing in my life right now traces back to those 4 seconds. I spent my last month's rent on bandages for a stranger. I didn't do it for a return. I did it because the math was simple. Someone was bleeding, and I was there. But sometimes, not always, not predictably, not in any way you can plan for, the math gives you something back. Sometimes it gives you everything. I say, ask me again in a month. He says, I'll ask you every day until you're ready. I say, that's not what he says, I know. I'll ask you every day. I don't let go of his hand. Below us, somewhere in the dark of the estate, 112,000 roses are still asking their question, still waiting for the answer. So is he. So am I. The end.